With the season almost being over, I thought I would make a couple of videos to talk about the playoffs and just give a little preview about what's in store. It's been a great regular season filled with ups and downs, a really tight MVP race that looks like it's gonna literally come down to the last game of the season. But unfortunately, as with life, it applies in the NBA, all good things must come to an end. But thankfully in sports, the end of the regular season means the beginning of the postseason, which is where a lot of people say the real basketball is played, and I somewhat agree. And today we're going to go over a lot of things in the playoffs you need to look out for, because man, when you really factor in what is going to happen this postseason, it's gonna blow your mind. But before we get started with this video, if you are not subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button and that bell for post notifications, because mustard don't stop. I just hit 70,000 subscribers, and it's because of you guys showing support, and I appreciate that so much. And speaking of showing support, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like also. It helps me out with the algorithm. But without further ado, let's get things started with the first revelation of the playoffs this season, and that's the Phoenix Suns' dominance. This year, the Suns have been insanely dominant, and I don't think people truly understand how crazy dominant they are, but when you break it down, it's even crazier than you think. Right now, they have the best record in the NBA at 58-14, and they are 9 games ahead of the Grizzlies, a Grizzlies team that's also 49-23 in their own right. And the fact that they are 9 games ahead of them is insane when you factor in all the injuries that they've had. Without DeAndre Ayton, they're 18-3. Without Chris Paul, they're 10-4. Without Devin Booker, they're 8-3. And the reason being is simply because of their depth and how their depth meshes well with the starters they have when they're on the court. You have shooters like Landry Shamet and Cameron Johnson, and then they also picked up Aaron Holiday lately, who can provide some defense and playmaking as well. And speaking of playmaking, let's not forget Cameron Payne, who's been stepping up a lot lately in replacement of Chris Paul. And then you combine that with bigs that are good in the pick and roll and nice lob threats, can crash the boards, and JaVale McGee and Bismack Biyombo for when DeAndre Ayton is not there, and that's a recipe for a great substitution placeholder. And even Torrey Craig has been very useful in areas that I did not expect, like at scoring or even on the glass. The team has proven to be much more than just Chris Paul and Devin Booker. Other guys are stepping up, and don't forget Mikal Bridges is one of the best defenders in the league and a top 5 defensive player of the year candidate right now. And come postseason time, they should have the advantage over a lot of teams if they are fully healthy. They truly don't have any weaknesses. They've addressed their size, they have multiple playmakers, they have a deep team, they have shooting and defense. I mean, what's not to like with this Phoenix Suns team? And their record shows it. In the playoffs, I truly believe they should be the favorites to come out of the Western Conference, and just imagine if they do. Everybody was saying the Suns' run last year was a fluke due to injuries, and now not only are they the best team in the league statistically, but they're leaps and bounds over the entire NBA. And if they prove that their run wasn't a fluke by getting back this year, it will truly cement a turnaround for this franchise, because let's not forget that 5 years ago they were picking in the lottery every single season, and now they have a chance to not only go back to back in finals appearances, but potentially win the championship this season. But speaking of winning championships, that brings us to the Milwaukee Bucks, the team that they beat in the finals last year. And I gotta say, the Bucks this year have had a roller coaster of a season. On one hand, you can look at their record and standings position and be like, okay, solid year. They're 44-27, they're 3rd in the Eastern Conference, nothing to be mad about. But then when you dig into the crux of what's actually happened to them this season, you start to see the roller coaster I was talking about. In the beginning of the year, they were hit with injuries to Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton getting COVID, and then you have Brook Lopez, who's missed damn near the entire season so far. And as far as that PJ Tucker role, they didn't really have anybody to step in and take on that role until they just recently brought in Serge Ibaka, who's been somewhat decent. But then on the bright side, Giannis is having another MVP caliber season and is top 3 in the MVP race, and depending on where you put him, you might have him at number 1. And despite Middleton starting off the season pretty trash, post All-Star break, he has been in his bag. Drew's also been playing playing amazing as well, having one of the best seasons of his career. And Bobby Portis, shout out to him because he's had a career season also from 3 and in his just total offensive production. There's a lot of things to like on this Bucks team, and trust me, Grayson Allen is not one of them. Fuck that guy. But as far as what's happened this season, there has been a lot of things that have caused some stress for the front office, I believe. But nonetheless, they're still one of the best teams in the NBA. As mentioned, they're the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference. They're a top 10 offense, and though defensively they've fallen off quite a little bit, I do believe they've been on somewhat autopilot this year and coasting a little bit on that end because they know their offense can make up for it, having Giannis and other players to step up on that end. And once Brook Lopez comes back, all he has to do is give them around 15 to 20 minutes because they have a solid big man rotation, and in the playoffs they can kick it up into another gear defensively. And as far as the playoffs, I've already made a video covering the Bucks and why they are in a perfect position to repeat. I mean, if you look at the rest of the Eastern Conference, nobody has the cohesiveness that they have. They just won a championship. Their chemistry has to be on point. Then you throw in the fact that they have one of the 5 best players in the NBA. You could argue the best, I would say he is, in Giannis Antetokounmpo. They have the depth to be able to compete with almost any roster in the league, even if it's not on par with some other rosters. And they have proven number 2 and 3 options in Jrue Holiday and Chris Middleton, who though are inconsistent at times, especially last postseason, they've proven that they can get the job done. So in the playoffs, I hate to say it, but they really have the most to gain. They can go back to back, increase their legacies, and as far as legacies are concerned, Giannis, man, I ain't gonna lie, if Giannis can pull off another chip in addition to him potentially winning the MVP and also even being the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year, my goodness, we're gonna have to have a conversation about where Giannis is not only ranked currently at that point, but maybe in the all-time scale as far as players, where he could rank in the future. Because for him to have done the things that he's done already at this stage in his career is already crazy enough. But then to add what he could potentially accomplish at the end of this season to his resume, and my goodness, we're gonna be having to talk about maybe GOAT pace. You know, we always talk about legacy and what it looks like for certain players. I just talked about Giannis's legacy and what it could potentially be at the end of the playoffs. But when we talk about players establishing their legacy by year 3, it truly is a very once-in-a-lifetime thing to see, especially for somebody like Ja Morant. Ja Morant has been one of the 10 best players this season and is having an MVP caliber year, but unfortunately, when you're in a league with Giannis, Jokic, and Embiid, you gotta take it to like an all-time level if you want to win the MVP with those guys in the league in their primes. But that doesn't take away what Ja Morant has done this season, averaging 28 points a game along with 7 assists and 6 rebounds on 49% shooting from the field and on a true shooting percentage of nearly 58%. Ja's been outstanding this year, and the Grizzlies have benefited from it as they have the 2nd best record in the league, not only the Western Conference but in the NBA, with a 49-23 record. And it's not just Ja that's been balling out on this team. Guys like Desmond Bane, who's been one of the best shooters in the league, he's stepped up. He's even shooting 42% on 7 attempts this season. You can't forget about Jaren Jackson Jr., who though offensively has taken a bit of a step back, on defense he's been outstanding. He's easily been one of the 5 to 10 best defenders in the league this season. Even in the Defensive Player of the Year race, he's 2nd, I believe. Then you throw in guys like Steven Adams, who's contributed on the boards and is a really solid passer for them out of the post. Other players like Tyus Jones, Brandon Clark, Kyle Anderson, Zaire Williams, DeAnthony Melton, they've all stepped up in their own unique ways, whether it's shooting, defense, playmaking, they're all providing something. And as I said earlier, when it comes to establishing your legacy so soon, like by year 3, Ja Morant could be doing that right now, because I think people are really underestimating what this team could do come postseason time. And I understand that they're young and inexperienced, but that's not entirely true. This team was in the playoffs last year despite their age. The same series that they took the Utah Jazz that was the 1st seed to 5 games, and a lot of those games were closer than you may think. And in that series, Ja Morant was averaging 30 and Dillon Brooks was averaging 26 a game as well. In this year, with a healthy and better Jaren Jackson Jr. along with Desmond Bane, I expect the Grizzlies to be dangerous come postseason time. And if they could make it out of the Western Conference, what a nice thing to put on Ja Morant and this team's resume right now. That would mean that they are far ahead ahead of schedule, and I don't think that's overachieving at all because this team is going to get better unless they've just peaked early, and I don't think that's the case. John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Zaire Williams, Tyus Jones, and Brandon Clark are 25 years or younger. And when you have a core like that that can stay together for years to come, man, I ain't gonna lie, I don't want to say dynasty, but if they can have a lot of success this season in the playoffs, who knows what's in the future. The Miami Heat. Now, I know Heat fans hate me because I did make a video about them and I said they're not real contenders. And I am fully prepared to apologize if I am proven wrong. But that's the thing, I just know I'm not going to be proven wrong. But I don't want to make this segment about me just shitting on the Miami Heat because trust me, they're still a good team, and come playoff time, I could see them making the second round for sure. I mean, they got a really deep roster that can contend with a lot of other teams in the NBA. But I won't spend too much time talking about this team because I did talk about them in a recent video, but this playoffs, if they can really supersede my expectations and not only make the NBA finals but potentially win a championship, they will finally be able to put all of this bubble talk about them to bed, because so many people look at their finals run in 2020 as a fluke due to the bubble environment. And not only are they going to be somewhat validated in their finals run in the bubble, but indirectly maybe the Lakers will also. And when you look at Jimmy Butler's career, I've asked a lot of people, do they see Jimmy Butler as a Hall of Famer? And the answer has varied from person to person. But in my personal opinion, I believe he is. But if he didn't get in the Hall of Fame, if his career were to end today, I would somewhat understand it. I mean, Chauncey Billups is not in the Hall of Fame, and you could say he has a better resume than Jimmy Butler, especially with that Finals MVP and championship in 2004. But if Jimmy were to get to the finals and win the Finals MVP this year, I believe he would cement his Hall of Fame case very clearly. And by the way, if that were to happen, assuming Tyler Hero steps up in a major way come postseason time, let's not forget they would also put down the narrative that they should have traded for James Harden and moved on from Tyler Hero to bed. I mean, the Heat can really prove their doubters wrong come playoff time. It's just about if they actually are going to do it, and y'all already know my answer is no. The Nets are one of the strangest teams in the NBA. Not only do they have a part-time player in Kyrie Irving, but they still have one of the top 5 players in the NBA in Kevin Durant, so you gotta take them serious. It recently even came out that Ben Simmons has a herniated disc, so the chances of him playing this year are probably slim to none, including the playoffs, because if he actually tries to play through that, something similar could happen to him that happened to Dwight Howard. Let's not forget that's the same injury that essentially ended his career. So this team that they currently have is probably the team they got going forward. Seth Curry is a nice role player. I like what he's done so far, not only this season for them, but also for the Sixers. He was balling out all year. Drummond has been solid on the boards and as a lob threat, but let's be real, come postseason time against the Sixers or the Bucks, he's going to be fried chicken. Losing Joe Harris was really tough, and though they have other guys like LaMarcus Aldridge and Patty Mills that can contribute from time to time, let's just be honest, this team is very flawed. It's Kevin Durant and a bunch of other role players until Kyrie Irving shows up for half of the games. And if we're being honest, Kevin Durant is the only reason why people are even mentioning the Nets as far as championship aspirations. I mean, the record speaks for itself. Kevin Durant is a phenomenal player, and when you have someone who's arguably the best player in the NBA, you somewhat have a chance, especially considering that his roster is not filled with a bunch of bums. It's just that they're not that good and flawed. But if they can somehow pull off a playoff miracle and win the championship, because trust me, it would be a miracle if they did that. For starters, that one ring that Kevin Durant would have won this postseason would be greater than both of his rings in Golden State combined, just for obvious reasons, let's just be real. And then Kyrie Irving, my goodness, talk about a sweet victory. I mean, winning a ring as a part-time player, you still contributed and you didn't even have to play most of the games. Talk about a W. And Steve Nash, you're finally a champion, but as a head coach, but you did it in your second season. My goodness, when you talk about the most to gain, this team, especially when you're talking about specific individuals, they might have the most to gain from winning a championship this year. You know, we were talking about the most to gain from a championship in the last segment, and that brought me to the Warriors, because the Warriors this year have been a really shaky team. On one hand, they've had a relatively successful season, being 47-24, but they've also had a really rocky season because they've had a lot of slumps. They were barely 500 without Draymond Green recently, and Steph Curry is now out with an injury. So because of that injury, there isn't really much to talk about with this team, especially if they don't have him for round 1 and things stayed the same as far as seeding goes. Because if Curry is out for round 1 and they have to face the Nuggets were already a scary matchup before the Curry injury, and now that he's hurt, if he doesn't play, they could potentially get swept. But if everything goes right for Steph Curry and this team, I could definitely see them making a deep playoff run, and if they win it all, my goodness, they will have proven themselves again as the best organization in basketball. Because let's not forget, they have young players in Kuminga, Wiseman, and Moses Moody that they could either use to get another superstar in a trade, or they could just use as building blocks for the future. Whatever they do, it's going to be in their benefit, and if they can pull off a championship this year, Steph Curry gets that finals MVP, I think we can finally start having those conversations about him being a top 10 player of all time. The Philadelphia 76ers are a very interesting team right now because they did just trade for James Harden, and I know a lot of people are saying, hey, you gotta give them time. They may not win it this year, but they gotta get that chemistry down pat first. And to be fair, I agree with that somewhat, but when you're James Harden and you've done the things that you've done to get out of so many situations, the excuses start to wear thin eventually. But this year, the Sixers have been relatively solid. They're second in the Eastern Conference, 44-27, and Joel Embiid is one of the top 3 candidates for the MVP right now. They have defenders in Matisse Thybulle and Danny Green, Joel Embiid also manning down the paint. They got shooters in Gorgie Niang, Danny Green, Joel Embiid can space the floor, James Harden is also a great shooter in his own right, and they have scoring options like Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, and James Harden, who I think are perfect as first, second, and third options. I mean, the team truly has everything you need to win a championship. It's all about if Harden and Embiid, who have choked a lot in the past, are going to step up. And if they do get the job done, talk about a W for the ages. They will go from playoff chokers on their resume to NBA champions. For Joel Embiid, he'd probably be a top 50 player of all time at that point, assuming how he plays on the way to the championship and in the finals. And as far as James Harden, you can finally open up that discussion of him versus Dwayne Wade. And let's not forget, Doc Rivers is also going to get that little boost from winning a championship this year as well, because he kind of needs it after losing last year and blowing 3-3-1 leads in his career. Now, before I wrap up this video, I do want to skim through a couple of other teams because there is something on the line for them also. The Celtics have been on a tear over the last couple of months, and because of it, Jason Tatum has now launched himself into the MVP conversation, though I don't believe he is a real MVP candidate. But because of their resurgence, I can't lie, if they were to somehow make the NBA Finals, not even win it, but just make it, just imagine how a change of narrative would have been for this team at the beginning of the season versus at the end of the year. Because they started off so slow, they were calling for the firing of their coach, and people were saying they should split up Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now both of those things look like pretty dumb and idiotic points. The Bulls have also been a team that has suffered due to narrative, as the narrative about them, my squad, I love them, but people are calling us frauds. Now, though I don't believe we're frauds because everybody is saying it, so how can we be frauds if everybody says it? I do believe that we are a team that has a lot of weaknesses, especially on the defensive side of the ball with injuries. We lost Pat Williams earlier on in the season. Alex Caruso missed a good chunk of the year due to an injury, and he was one of the best defenders in the league before his injury. And then you throw Lonzo Ball in the equation, who's been one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. Him and Caruso were probably going to make an all-defensive team before they were injured, and Lonzo right now, there's been a setback in his rehab. And outside of those guys, it's not like we have specialists on the defensive side of the ball. You have guys like Vucevic, who's strong in the post, but he isn't really much outside of that. Levine has improved, especially as far as a team defender, but he's not stopping anybody, and DeMar DeRozan has been a liability on that end essentially throughout his whole career. We have the offensive firepower, especially in arguably the best duo in DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine this season, but unfortunately that's just not enough when we can't keep up with anybody on the defensive side of the ball. But in the playoffs, if we can actually get out the first round and beat the Celtics, that's a W for us in a huge way. And if we lose, I know people are just gonna say, hey, that proves the Bulls were frauds, even though everybody everybody thinks the Celtics are better than us anyways, but you know, it is what it is. It's the NBA, right? Then you look out west and you have the Utah Jazz, and let's be honest, the Jazz are a regular season team. Every playoffs, they're exposed for their lack of defense outside of Rudy Gobert, and though Donovan Mitchell turns into a playoff god, it just is not enough. So it's very clear what their gain is come postseason time. Prove the haters wrong and remove that regular season label off, and if they can do it, it'll be the first time in history that the Jazz have won a championship. And I also think it'll set Donovan Mitchell on the path to becoming the greatest player in the history of their franchise, and probably Rudy Gobert maybe being the second greatest, because that other guy is a pedophile, so we don't really talk about him. But one guy we do talk about is Luka Doncic, and the Mavericks, even though I don't believe they're going to win a championship, if the seeding stays the way it is, somebody is going to take an L in the first round between Rudy Gobert and Luka Doncic. And I say Rudy Gobert because he's probably either going to be traded or just shit on so much in the offseason if they lose. But as far as the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic is concerned, ever since he's come back from COVID, especially over the last 10 or 15 games, Luka Doncic has been insane, averaging 29 points, 9 assists, and 10 rebounds, a steal on 45, 35, and 75 shooting splits. Luka has easily not only put himself in the MVP conversation, but you could argue during that stretch he might have been the best player in the NBA, though you do have other arguments, don't get me wrong. But that just highlights what Luka Doncic is. He's an amazing regular season player, and though he's had great playoff moments, he just has not broken through yet out of the first round. And I think if they lose again, especially now that he has other guys stepping up like Jalen Brunson, Spencer Dinwiddie's been great since the trade, and if those guys step up in the playoffs, I think Luka Doncic's excuses are going to start running thin, and the narrative of him being a playoff underperformer is going to start showing. And whether you think that narrative is fair or not, we all know how the NBA community works, especially the media. They latch onto a narrative, and whatever sticks, they run with it. But hey, those are just my opinions on these teams. I genuinely think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the playoffs, because all these teams I talked about, they got something on the line and a lot of things to gain as well. If you guys disagreed with me, let me know down below what you think in the comment section. I'll try my best to respond to as many people as possible. Don't forget to follow me on social media. The links for my socials are all in the description box down below. This is your boy Young Mustard signing out. Y'all stay safe and have a blessed day. Peace.